I'm Cheryl Lacey with the Cheryl Lacey Show, and we are talking about lawlessness today. We've been discussing all sorts of issues in Australia, including men's health issues and suicide, and the continuing impact of COVID on families as well, and what we're going to do about our parliamentarians who are also lawlessness but somehow continue to get away, and could I say literally, with blood on their hands, it would seem, in many respects. So it is a delight to have Sharon Rondeau on the show, editor of The Post and Email, and many of my listeners I know follow Sharon and her terrific articles online, and Sharon is going to be talking to us about lawlessness as well, but this time with a story that continues to unfold and shock many of us. It's the Minnesota fraud. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me again, Cheryl.
Oh, it's always good to have you, Sharon. Look, I don't know what's going on in the States at the moment in terms of the mood, but this is such an incredible story, particularly given that Kamala Harris's running mate in the recent election is part and parcel of this entire situation. Perhaps you can give us a bit of a rundown and some background as to what this Minnesota fraud is all about.
Well, as you said, it is a huge story and continues to get even more enormous by the day, almost by the hour. I did not break the story. Other people, other researchers did. Evidently, it started with people within Tim Walz's, who's the governor of Minnesota, within his own administration, working within these social service agencies, of which there are many, really in every state, but I guess Minnesota is a little more generous than many. And they went to him, and they said, this money is being stolen, essentially. It's not going to where it's supposed to go. It's not feeding needy children. It's not clothing anyone. It's not giving anyone Medicaid, or Medicaid is our government-run program for low-income people, or disabled or elderly. And they blew the whistle on this, and they claim Tim Walz did nothing about it, and in fact, basically, shooed him out of his office, figuratively speaking. And I don't know how many whistleblowers, per se, are involved, but the people speaking on TV say they have sources who are primary sources who were within these offices, and that nothing was done. And in fact, some of them claim to have been threatened or actually moved to a different position in order to keep them quiet. So it remains to be seen how many people are involved or how many people even blew the whistle, and then from there, what happened and what didn't happen. But it is absolutely blowing up, and very quickly, the dots connected led to, apparently, Representative Ilhan Omar, who is from Minnesota's 5th congressional district. Every state is divided into congressional districts for both Senate and the House of Representatives in both the state and federal levels. At any rate, she had some staffers who already have been convicted, and that was actually news to me, because I've been covering a different aspect of Ilhan Omar, which we may or may not touch on depending on your interest. But this story, it's just many tentacles, and you never know what you're going to hear from day to day.
Look, it really is incredible, and my understanding is that the Somali community, particularly in Minnesota, was something that grew out of Bill Clinton giving them asylum, and a number of the Somalis started working for meat packers because there was no need to understand English and they were able to get straight into the workforce. Are you familiar with that?
Only a little bit, and I believe, now I did not hear Bill Clinton was the one who let them in. Obama played a big role in that. That I definitely remember. And some of the newscasters, primarily Fox News, many of them don't really want the cat to get out of the bag here, but primarily Fox News was saying, well, it was Obama whose idea was to bring over many, tens of thousands of Somalis And sometimes they went to the Eastern Seaboard, like Virginia. They went to places there. But a lot of them then moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, because it just became a community. Someone was talking about the fact that they came from a very, very warm climate, and then they ended up in a very cold climate, and I'm not sure how that worked or why that was done that way, but many of them stayed. I mean, tens of thousands. They estimate that it's about 84,000 Somalis, or Somali nationals. Some of them naturalized. They said many of them naturalized. I think they said 60%. But what our Homeland Security Secretary said, Christy Noem was her name, on an interview with Laura Ingraham on Monday, was it Monday night? Thursday, because I wrote about it. She said they're finding up to 50% fraud in the immigration visas, which were completed by these Somali people. It's not saying everybody. Some of them may have done everything by the book and done it right. But she is saying up to 50% of the visa applications contain fraudulent statements. So I think now that the door has flown wide open on this, between the fraud with the Medicaid and the child care and all of these things. In fact, there's a story that dates back to 2018 when someone wrote about Somali community, it didn't happen to emanate from there, committed daycare fraud. There was some kind of fraud where they said, well, we need money to run this daycare, and it turned out there were no kids in the daycare. I don't have all the details, but that is an excellent story. The author of that story is also a writer at what's called Powerline Blog, and he also writes the City Journal. And City Journal is the same online magazine where Christopher Rufo and another co-author named Ryan Thorpe broke this story on November 19th about the massive social service fraud, the overall many people involved, people close to Representative Omar and other people prominent in the Minnesota community. And now they're pointing the fingers at Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, who was just reelected last month. It's already December. And then also the governor. They're saying these people must have known. And then also Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who used to be a member of Congress years ago, but he's been Attorney General there for a while. I think he's in his second term. I'm accusing no one. Everyone's innocent until proven guilty, of course. That's the way our Constitution works, particularly the Fifth Amendment and all of that, Sixth Amendment. But they have been accused. The finger has been pointed at all of these people as absolutely having to have had knowledge of this.
So we have fraud on many fronts, not just, you mentioned Social Security fraud, no surprises there. You've also got 50% of fraudulent applications for asylum or residency into the United States, and yet we have those who's getting fingers pointed at, laughing at President Trump when he's speaking out about this and wanting to put security, particularly health, back in the hands of the people. We've got a real issue here and a big divide between socialism or communism and responsible freedom in the United States. We're experiencing that here in Australia as well. Sharon, do you think it's going to get worse before it gets better?
Well, it very well may. I think we have not quite gotten to the core of what happened here in Minnesota. And I don't like to say it, but it probably exists in all other states too, to one degree or another. I'm not saying every governor knows of social service fraud going on and specifically decided to look the other way. I don't think that's necessarily true, but there is fraud. These programs are rife with fraud. And it reminds me of the whole issue of election fraud. People are astounded when you say, oh, well, there's fraud in this state or that town or this city in this particular city. There's fraud everywhere because it seems as though people are wont to cheat if they think they can get away with it and if they have a good reason in their mind for doing it. So the same with this social service fraud. Essentially, Ilhan Omar, the representative I mentioned, had really gone to bat for these these food programs. One of them was during COVID, and of course there was a lot of hardship, and people were locked down, and kids weren't in school, and so they wanted a lot of money appropriated for children to have meals while they weren't in school because schools were locked down. And evidently, a lot of the money never went to children who might have been going hungry or might have been a little undernourished or not getting the 3 square meals a day they should have, of course. If that was even the case, there's just so much of this. So I think it will get worse, and the rhetoric here, I would say the rhetoric in the United States, some of it is absolutely repulsive. And all kinds of references to Nazis in World War II, and that just has no place, in my opinion, in our political discourse, and yet it comes up again and again. And I don't like to say this either, but it always seems to come from one side of the political aisle.
You've put that very well. It does seem to come from one side of the political aisle. However, let's just think for a moment about that, Sharon, because we actually don't know who's who anymore. In some respects either. They could appear to be on one side of a political aisle, but they're really working on the other. So it could be a very, very deep, deep state we are dealing with. And you've mentioned social security fraud. There's also the issue of these not-for-profit organisations that are sending money overseas allegedly to terrorist organisations.
Yes, extremely good point. And apparently, that's what they're saying. Chris Ruffo and Ryan Thorpe, who wrote the breaking story on November 19th at City Journal, they say that a certain amount of this money was funneled to El-Shabaab. I read their entire article. It was extremely well written, I thought. And they both write for City Journal, which is a program, or I should say a publication of what's called the Manhattan Institute. It's a think tank. Essentially, not that there's anything wrong with that, just explaining who's behind that. But Chris Ruffo was on TV quite a bit, especially now because he broke the story. But they claim, and he had very good sources, he had a former sheriff from Washington State who said he had seen that in Seattle. When he was retired, but he said when he was in office, he did see it there. And he said he started a research project after he retired and found that what went on in Seattle is very similar to what seems to be going on in Minneapolis and vice versa. So there's that. And then he had 2 other sources, both of whom were former law enforcement or FBI. I forget exactly their credentials, but they seem to be extremely well placed. And they said El-Shabaab is for sure being funded by American taxpayer dollars. And of course, nearly anyone I know would find that absolutely abhorrent and not something we want to do. One thing I will say is that some of the people, this is only what I've seen on television, but some in the Somali community do not seem to be assimilated. And you'll find this kind of commentary anywhere. It's not extreme or anything. They came to America, and whether they became citizens or not, and that's a whole other issue, I think. How do you test someone's loyalty or love for this country or really a desire to assimilate and become an American? I'm not sure how you test that. I know they have the citizenship test, of course. You have to have residency for 5 years. You cannot have committed a crime during that time. You have to have lived in the United States nearly all of that 5 years. They do allow you to be overseas on business or whatever if you had to be. And then there's a language test and civics and history, and the test is probably hard enough that most people here who are born here can't pass it. And for sure, a high school graduate probably couldn't pass it unless they're extremely bright and advanced placement and all of that. But be that as it may, there are those tests, and people do take the oath if they become an American citizen. But many of them don't seem to have assimilated. And I know Ilhan Omar speaks Somalian sometimes when she gives an address. And what she'll say in Somalian is very pro-Somalia. And the story on her, if you want to get into this, is that she, as a U.S. Congresswoman, may not even herself be an American citizen. I don't know if you've read that or kind of delved into that aspect of this whole thing or not. It actually came up long before this whole Minnesota fraud thing was exposed, but it's a very interesting factor. And I think the Trump administration, the Department of Justice, and those who look at immigration visas and records and things, I think they could be on the cusp of something. And I want to say that the Posting the Mail's reporting has been in line with this, although, I'm not a primary source, but I've interviewed a woman who ran against Omar several years ago in 2022 in the DSL party, which is the Democratic Farmer and Labor Union. That's what they call the Democrats in Minnesota. And she ran and she asked for Omar and another primary contender, Don Samuels, to release the records of their naturalizations, respectively, because Don Samuels was knowingly, admittedly born in Jamaica. And that's fine. We welcome foreigners here if they come the right way. Neither of them would release it. It became a lawsuit, and then the lawsuit was ultimately dismissed because the judge said, well, only Congress can determine who sits among its ranks. It's up to them. And, well, we all know you have to be a U.S. citizen. If you serve in the U.S. House of Representatives, it says you must be 7 years a citizen of the United States, and you must be a resident of the district in which you are running. And it looks to me, certainly, as though Omar never naturalized. There's no proof she ever did. And in the stories I've written, which are based very much on the DSL contenders lawsuit, and the fact that she then queried the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, for records on Ilhan Omar's father. The reason for that was Ilhan Omar claimed on her website and other places she became a U.S. citizen at age 17 when her father naturalized. We do have something called derivative citizenship. I've read about it quite a bit, and it's on the USCIS website. Derivative citizenship means your parent became a U.S. citizen legally, honorably, did all the right things, lived in the country for the required amount of time, everything, when you were still underage. So that means you have to be under 18. And Ilhan claims she was 17 at the time. But the query, which A.J. Kern, her name is, the former DSL contender, when she submitted the FOIA request, she said, I'd like the records of Ilhan Omar's father for naturalization. He passed away in 2020, apparently from complications of coronavirus. And so his records should be able to be released. If it's a living person, then USCIS and all other government agencies will say no unless you have their written permission. At any rate, that wasn't an issue here. And the paperwork they sent A.J. Kern was that they have no records of naturalization, that they actually looked. They weren't claiming any privacy protection at all. They understand he's deceased. And they said, we can find no record of anyone with that name or anything even close to that name. And then she gave them a birth year, which was maybe plus or minus 5 years. So there was a big amount of leeway there. And they said they can't find anything.
So, Sharon, we've got a clear issue here with, back to what you were saying there regarding the fraudulent applications of people coming into the country, but then it seems like there's this, for some people, because clearly there's some outstanding Somali people who have assimilated well, there are others, such as this woman you're speaking about in Congress, who takes advantage and continues, and they clearly learn very quickly the processes to continue the fraud, if that is the case. It seems that big change is required, and I'm going to stop you there, Sharon, because we need to keep following this story, and I'd like to get you back, if not next week, the week after.